Jaya Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Gaurachandra Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Jaya Gadadhar Jaya Srinivas Jaya Mukunda Vasudevi Jaya Haridas.
Hare Krishna, a warm welcome to all our viewers in the GBC Strategic Planning Team platform. Today, where we're going to talk about our series, the ongoing series, Every Town and Village, which is, just around the time, hosted around the time of Gaur Purnima. And we hope that the series actually helps devotees to dive deeper into Srila Prabhupada's principles and strategies for serving Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's preaching mission. And to talk with us more about this today, we have with us Praghosa Prabhu. Praghosa Prabhu needs no introduction in ISKCON, but nevertheless, a warm welcome to you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare
A warm welcome to you from the strategic planning team. Praghosa Prabhu is based in Dublin, Ireland, and he joined ISKCON in the 1983 in London and is a disciple of Satsvarupa Maharaj. He has been involved in various services, but primarily he's been involved with book distribution, fundraising, and managing temples. At present, he's managing 3 Govinda restaurants in Dublin, along with his wife, Goloka Devi Dasi. And also, as many of us would be aware that Praghosa Prabhu is the driving force behind the news portal Danvats. He's also a GBC member for England and the neighboring areas. And one outstanding thing which not many would know is that he is the first grand disciple of Srila Prabhupada, who was actually the chair of the GBC. So a warm welcome to you, Prabhuji, and we're looking forward to hear from you today on our topic, which is how Srila Prabhupada's vision can fill society's abyss of leadership. So once again, a warm welcome, and the floor is yours. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Parijata, for that nice introduction. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Nama Om Vishnu Padaya, Krishna Gosaya Bhutale, Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nityananda. Namaste Sarasvati Devi Gauravani Pracharane. Nivashesha Sunyavali Pashtita De Shatarane. Om Ajanath Marandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Umlitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Sri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayarupa Gadamayam Dadati Swabadantikam. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jai, Hare Krishna, everybody. So as Parijata was mentioning, this series is in the week leading up to Gaur Purnima, the most auspicious event, essentially, for devotees of Lord Krishna. And we know that those devotees of Krishna who are sincerely trying to serve him, they actually become ecstatic and extremely joyful by rendering their loving devotional service and glorifying him. Bhagavad-Gita tells us that Makchitama Kata Pranabo Dhanyata Parasparam, that the devotees, they just derive great satisfaction and bliss by engaging in devotional service and by engaging in Krishna Katha, or discussing the pastimes of Krishna, discussing the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, that this is something that brings real joy, pleasure and ecstasy to them. And Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj reveals to us in the Chaitanya Charitamrita how Krishna himself, seeing this ecstasy in his devotees, especially Srimati Radharani, the gopis and the gopas, etc., but seeing this ecstasy that the devotees derive from that service that they render to him, that he wanted to experience it, because naturally they're deriving that ecstasy from serving Krishna. So in one sense, Krishna can't serve himself. So he was devoid of that. He wasn't experiencing that, but he was so amazed by it that he really wanted to have that same experience. And he concluded that unless he adopted the mood of a devotee, he wouldn't be able to experience that ecstasy. So as we know, as I mentioned, the topmost devotee of Lord Krishna is Srimati Radharani. And Krishna therefore chose to accept both the emotion, the complexion, the mood of Srimati Radharani, and he descended thus as the combination of Radha and Krishna descended as Lord Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So that's the one of the reasons why Krishna descended in this incredibly unique incarnation of Sri Krishna Chaitanya. So Lord Chaitanya is Krishna himself, but in the form and the mood of a devotee. And by becoming a devotee, Lord Chaitanya, he both performed and taught, which of course is such an important point for us, that he performed devotional service, but taught devotional service, loving devotional service to humanity at large, traveling all over India, etc., to do that. And as Lord Chaitanya, Lord Krishna, he's especially merciful in this particular incarnation, especially merciful, Mahavadanya. And that's a description of Lord Chaitanya, this incredibly merciful personality. And even towards the most sinful of people. It wasn't limited to only one particular group. It was universal, opening the storehouse of love of Godhead to the entire humanity. So where Krishna would have kind of killed unscrupulous people, like all the demons in Krishna Leela, Lord Chaitanya's mood was to transform them like that. And he bestowed Nam, the holy name, widely and distributed it to everybody. And likewise, once they engaged in that process, he was freely distributing prema, or love of God, on these most fallen of personalities, like our good selves, of course, that we're all beneficiaries of that merciful mood of Lord Chaitanya. And no other incarnation of Krishna has exhibited such a high level of divine mercy, with no payment whatsoever, except the desire to take to the process that Lord Chaitanya is offering, has offered, is offering, and will continue to offer to all the living entities in the material world. Before talking a little bit more about Lord Chaitanya, I would though like to explain a little bit where the quite kind of striking title of this talk came from, how Srila Prabhupada's vision can fill society's abyss of leadership. So when I was asked to talk on this series, and of course it's a great honor and privilege to be able to do so, so I thank everybody who asked me to do that. But when I was asked, it was a few weeks back, and I suggested that title. It was literally just in the immediate aftermath of the recent appalling, horrendous and brutal developments that are going on in Eastern Europe, in the Ukraine. And I'm not going to give a commentary on those developments and those events that are taking place, but I think we can all at least embrace, or fully understand that the further we move away from a society that's based on the principles of Dharma, and of course, not just Dharma, but just as we're talking, the principles of this extreme compassion, mercy, and benediction that Lord Chaitanya so much symbolizes, that the more that we move away from those qualities, and as I say, those principles of Dharma, we then don't have to take too many more steps. And that's kind of an interesting thing. Sometimes we may feel safe in a certain space, but in one sense, we always need to be progressing in our spiritual life and our spiritual understanding, because once progression stops, then actually we don't have to go back very far. And particularly, as I say, in relation to following Dharma, that we don't have to take too many more steps once we stop making progress on that path before we literally will fall into an abyss of, wretchedness and hardship and anguish, torment, torture, and ultimately, as we're seeing right now in Eastern Europe, pure hell. I mean, that's literally what's being rained down on all of these people. So that was the origin of the title. I was just thinking, we need leadership, real leadership, not materialistic leadership, but real leadership that is not based on I, me, and mine, not based on any personal desire for some kind of recognition or power or whatever it might be. Leadership that is based on actually the welfare of others. As Lord Chaitanya is also known as Patita Pavana, the savior of the most fallen, and also the Bengali slips my mind, but he's the savior of the most fallen, and Para Upakara, that his mission is the welfare of all humanity, like that, all living entities actually. So that's where the origin of the title came from. And of course, all of our thoughts are with those who are suffering right now, not least our fellow devotees. We have somewhere in the region, devotees, congregational members, etc., somewhere in the region of 20,000 devotees who are living in Ukraine. So our thoughts are really, some of them are in extremely difficult situations. We also, I'm drifting a little bit from what I was meant to talk about, but just to mention, we have an initiative, particularly in Europe right now, because obviously Europe is where this is all happening. And we have coordinators for each yatra in the European continent. And we're working, different devotees working very, very hard. I should give a shout out to Sukanti Radha Devi and also Chaitanya Chandra Prabhu from Hungary, who are working really, really hard to help devotees in the Ukraine to actually leave and come into the neighboring countries and then travel to different yatras throughout Europe where we can look after them. So yeah, that was where the title came from. It's an abyss of leadership. How can it not be anything other than an abyss of leadership? And an abyss basically means, if you like, a hole that has no bottom. It's bottomless. You just keep falling like that. So we really do, when these things are happening in our world, we really have an abyss of leadership, and that's what allows these things to take place. So we know that, or we also know that conflict can be conducted in a way that is also aligned with Dharma, the most extraordinary of all spiritual presentations in existence, was born, emanated, emerged from the center of a battlefield. And of course, that's the Bhagavad-Gita. And of course, Arjuna was such a key figure in that presentation, the Bhagavad-Gita presentation, in his dialogue with Lord Krishna. And Prabhupada, of course, he gives many thoughts and many comments, but he comments on Arjuna and indeed the Pandavas, really. He talks about the 5 pious Kshatriya brothers who were the intimate friends of Lord Krishna. They inherited the leadership of the world upon their victory over the Kuru dynasty at the Battle of Kurukshetra. They inherited the leadership of the world. So this was and their leadership, of course, was very different than the leadership that we experience today. And of those Pandavas, you would argue that nobody displayed that incredible quality of leadership and had those incredible qualities of integrity and truthfulness and honor and all of those wonderful adjectives that we would want in all of our leaders. So of the Pandavas, none of them displayed that more than Maharaj Yudhishthira. And we also know that the law of karma is a very complex thing. And Maharaj Yudhishthira, he's famous for his answer to a particular question that he was posed at a particular point in time when he was asked, what do you consider the most amazing thing in this world? That was the question that he was asked. What do you consider to be the most amazing thing in this world? And he responded, Ahanyahani Bhutani, which basically means that the most, and this is what Maharaj Yudhishthira, this was his answer to that question. The most amazing thing in this world is that everybody, nobody is free from this. Every single person, everybody in this world has the experience of death. And by that we mean that, for instance, in my own case, all of my 4 grandparents, both of my parents, even one of my siblings, they've died. They've left this world. They have died. So Maharaj Yudhishthira's point was the most amazing thing in this world is that we all have experience of death in our own family, etc., in our own community, whatever it may be. We all have that experience of death. But we all live our lives as though it is never going to happen to us. So that was his that was his answer to that question. So on the point about karma being very complicated, at the same time, as Maharaj Yudhishthira is famous for that, meaning famous, he was famous for the ability of people to overlook, such a crucial thing. But at the same time, he's also famous for his despondency as a result of the loss of life due to the Battle of Kurukshetra. So in one sense, he's amazed that people, are sort of forgetting about death. But then at the same time, when he saw the amount of death and destruction that took place on the Battle of Kurukshetra, he was very despondent and he felt responsible for it. And then there's a wonderful exchange between him and Bhishma Dev, because Maharaj Yudhishthira, as I say, he was very disturbed due to that massacre, the great massacre at Kurukshetra. And Bhishma Dev, it was their grandfather Bhishma Dev, that he could understand Maharaj Yudhishthira's upset. And therefore, because he was aware of that, he first spoke about the terrible pain that Maharaj Yudhishthira was experiencing. Because in a cold philosophical sense, Maharaj Yudhishthira could have just been told, what are you lamenting for? This is karma. What's the problem? But no, out of compassion, he was compassionate for effectively people who, certainly in a relative sense, would be deemed to be innocent like that. So he had great compassion for this. He was feeling responsible for this. Grandfather Bhishma Dev, he didn't dismiss that. He didn't dismiss that as sentimental or something unnecessary. No, he first spoke to that and addressed that. And he explained to Maharaj Yudhishthira how he's been put into this difficulty by injustice only, and that the Battle of Kurukshetra was fought to counteract or to right that injustice. And it was on that basis your lamentation and your despondency and your compassion is absolutely fine, but ultimately you shouldn't regret what's happened in this battle, because it had to right the injustice that was taken place. And then he went on to point out to him that, as long as one is protected by the Brahmanas and by religious principles, and of course by Lord Krishna himself, as long as we're under that protection, there's no reason ever for disappointment. And it was in that way that Bhishma Dev encouraged Maharaj Yudhishthira to basically dissipate, to let go of his despondency. As I say, on the basis that as long as a person is in cooperation with the wishes of the Lord, there's never a cause for despondency, however trying the circumstances of life. And that's the important thing, however trying the circumstances are. And they were very trying when in relation to Maharaj Yudhishthira's situation in the aftermath of the Battle of Kurukshetra. But we all experience those trying circumstances, and the way to protect ourselves from them will still be affected by them in many ways, but ultimately the way to protect ourselves from them is to deal with them in as Krishna conscious a way as possible, and then we will have the protection of the devotees, and we'll have the protection of Lord Krishna. So from that point of view, we can see that whatever karma may dictate, and karma dictates so many things, not least us leaving these bodies, but karma will dictate so many things, but whatever it may dictate, our glory really is to follow in the footsteps of Bhishma Dev and identify with the suffering that karma causes to others. We should never be impersonal or callous or indifferent to, you know, the karma that people are suffering. We always should have compassion for that and deal with that and not dismiss it, just as Bhishma Dev didn't dismiss it in relation to Maharaj Yudhisthira. And from that compassionate position, everything else, the rest of the karmic situation, etc., it will take care of itself, but it will protect us from falling foul of, you know, I don't know, pontification, you know, pontificating about these things, what to speak of even gloating about such things like that. It will soften our hearts, you know, to deal with these things, both from the relative point of view and also the absolute point of view, and keep that balance there nicely. We also saw that mood, that sweet mood, if you like, of compassion, gloriously displayed by Maharaj Yudhisthira's grandson, Maharaj Parikshit, like that. He was simply, you know, use colloquial language, but he was simply gobsmacked, you know, totally dumbfounded when he found an impostor in his kingdom inflicting such pain and suffering on innocent civilians such as the cow and the bull. He just couldn't, it was just beyond his comprehension that somebody in a kingdom that he was responsible for and that he was governing, it just was beyond comprehension that somebody would do that at all, but particularly in his kingdom. And, you know, somewhat ironically, if our compassion is fully developed, then it would also be deployed, and Maharaj Parikshit in that sense did deploy it on Kali, the impostor. And I won't get into that pastime too much, but he did. He also showed compassion to Kali. Kali surrendered at his feet, and then Maharaj Parikshit showed him compassion, and you know, gave him a place where he could engage in his nonsense. Although it was very difficult for Kali to find such a place anyway, but still there was an element of compassion. So yeah, from a, you know, somewhat ironic, if you like, not really ironic, but anyway, if our compassion is fully developed, then it would also be deployed on those who inflict the pain and suffering on the innocent. And why is that? That's because those people in the pastime of Maharaj Parikshit, it's Kali. In the current situation in the world, it's other people who will remain unnamed for now. But their future really is about as bleak as a vast battlefield covered with nothing but kind of frozen mud in the middle of a deep, dark winter. Their future is even bleaker than that. You know, their soon-to-be situation that they will face on their deathbed will even be 1 million, 1 billion, 1 trillion times bleaker than that, as they basically will face the result of their heinous actions like that. So naturally, as devotees, you know, if we really have developed this principle of compassion, we also have compassion for them. In no way do we support them. In no way do we justify anything that they're doing. But ultimately, you know, that compassion should be there as well. And that's what we see from these great acharyas. You know, they show that. So leadership and this abyss of leadership, it's interesting because sometimes, at least to me, it comes across sometimes as overwhelming. It's kind of overwhelming. How do we provide that leadership? You know, what effect can we have? What impact can we have? It seems like the crises and the way the world works is just, wow, it's just beyond our ability to even get a foothold in trying to improve it and try to make it better like that. But leadership, and the very important point, we shouldn't feel alone like that, because leadership is not about, you know, being able to do everything ourselves or trying to do everything ourselves. That really isn't leadership. And given, as we say, we're in the lead up now to the appearance of Lord Chaitanya, who better to quote than the incomparable Lord Chaitanya? And one of the things that he spoke was Ekaki Amara Nahi Paya Bolo Harinam Sankirtane. Ekaki Amara Nahi Paya Bolo, Harinam Sankirtane. And that was Lord Chaitanya saying, I do not find the strength to carry on alone with this Sankirtan movement, this Sankirtan mission of spreading the holy name of Hare. I do not find the strength alone to carry on. We've just spoken about who is Lord Chaitanya. Lord Chaitanya is this incredible combined incarnation of Lord Sri Krishna, who created with the glancing, not even the movement of his neck, just with the glancing of his eye, Krishna created the whole cosmic manifestation. This incredible personality combined with Radharani. And here he is saying that I do not find the strength alone to be able to carry on with this Sankirtan movement, this Sankirtan mission of spreading the holy name of Lord Hare. And Srila Prabhupada, he reflects on this very topic in different places, but I've just picked out one place. This was a letter that he wrote in 1973. So 1973, Srila Prabhupada wrote this letter. It's an extract from it. It was a longer letter. But he says, please try to maintain the philosophy of unity in diversity. That will make our movement successful. One section of men have already gone. Therefore, we must be very careful to maintain unity in diversity. And remember the story of Aesop's fables, of the father of many children with the bundle of sticks. When the father asked his children to break the bundle of sticks, none of them could do it. But when they removed one stick from the bag and tried to break them one by one, the sticks were very easily broken. So this is the strength of unity. If we are bunched up, we can never be broken. But when divided, then we can become broken very easily. So Srila Prabhupada here, he's very much promoting the need to work together, basically to work together as a team. And as is Lord Chaitanya, he's basically making the same point, that we should be working together, because Lord Chaitanya is saying alone he cannot, he cannot continue with this Sankirtan movement. So, and that's Srila Prabhupada. I've just quoted that letter, and obviously we've just quoted Lord Chaitanya. But there are many other examples throughout Shastra of where the necessity of working in a combined and unified way, working together as a team. Lord Krishna himself is a great example of being a team player. He went out every single day herding the cows and grazing the cows and looking after the cows, etc. But he didn't do it on his own. He brought all of his Gopa friends to do it. And it was all of those pastimes, they indicate that by Krishna's personal example as a leader, that he led a very, organized and cohesive team of Gopas. And he was always inclusive, never tried to be exclusive. Then you have the example of Hanuman, who was the leader of his team of monkeys. And they were equally excellent and a great example for us all to emulate. Hanuman, he built the bridge to Lanka, but he was only able to do that with that, organized assistance and critical assistance of his team of monkeys. And we've just been talking about Lord Chaitanya. And when you think of Lord Chaitanya's pastimes, in Navadvip in particular, also Jagannath Puri, when Lord Chaitanya would go out in Harinam, he didn't go on his own. He always had devotees around him, and whatever he was doing, whether it was the kirtans in Srivas Pandit's house, etc., he was always with devotees, surrounded by devotees. He was never alone. So this principle of working together, uniting, and cooperating together, it's just such a crucial part of leadership, because we cannot do it. If Lord Chaitanya cannot do it on his own, we certainly cannot do it on our own. So there's many different facets and many different characteristics of leadership. In Bhagavad-Gita, Krishna informs us of different leadership qualities. particularly for the leaders of society like the Brahmanas and the Kshatriyas. So, he talks about, peacefulness and self-control and austerity and purity and tolerance and honesty, knowledge, wisdom, etc. And then goes on to talk about heroism and power, determination, resourcefulness, and courage in battle and generosity. But over and above all of those qualities that Krishna lists in the Bhagavad-Gita for leaders, arguably the most important quality of all of them is our ability to cooperate. And cooperation, of course, was such a major focus of Srila Prabhupada. We all know that one of Srila Prabhupada's final instructions, if not his final instruction actually, was his pleading with his devotees to cooperate. And actually, just to give a little background on that, we all know the story, but somehow or another, I was talking about that instruction of Srila Prabhupada with His Holiness Bhakti Churu Maharaj, the glorious Bhakti Churu Maharaj, who we all so dearly miss. Absolutely, just such a wonderful, wonderful devotee, a wonderful disciple of Srila Prabhupada, wonderful Vaishnava qualities, etc. Anyway, such an inspirational personality. So I was talking with him one time about Srila Prabhupada's comment about cooperation in the days just before he left this world. And Raj told me that actually, the background to that was every day Tamal Krishna Maharaj, another devotee we dearly miss, Tamal Krishna Maharaj would come in and he would read different letters that had come in the post. He would read them to Srila Prabhupada. So one day Tamal Krishna was reading those letters, and there was one from a disciple, one of Srila Prabhupada's disciples. And basically it was saying, I'm a young man, Srila Prabhupada. You're an old man, but you're much more important than me. So I want to offer you my body so that you can take over my body, and then you can continue with your mission for many, many more years to come. So it was a nice gesture, but it was kind of a little sentimental and impractical, to say the least. So when it was read to him and when it was finished, Srila Prabhupada's response was, that is not important. And of course, time and tide waits for no man. So, even if Srila Prabhupada somehow or another was able to use that disciple's body to continue, that body would become old, so in one sense, there's no real benefit almost. But anyway, Srila Prabhupada said, that is not important. What is important is that you all, meaning all of his disciples, you all learn to cooperate, to keep this movement together after I am gone. So that was the kind of background to that, which I thought was interesting. So this principle of cooperation is so important. And then to make a kind of a connection, or if you like, a cooperation between Lord Chaitanya and Maharaj Yudhishthir. Well, Lord Chaitanya, he in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Lord Chaitanya cites a famous verse that was spoken by Maharaj Yudhishthir in the Mahabharata. And again, it's on this very principle of leadership. And that verse is the Tarko Pratishta Shutayo Vibhina verse, which ends with Mahajano Yena Gata Sapanta. And that verse, and I'll just read the English, is dry arguments are inconclusive. A great personality whose opinion does not differ from others is not considered a great personality. Simply by studying the Vedas, which are variegated, one cannot come to the right path by which religious principles are understood. The solid truth of religious principles is hidden in the heart of an unadulterated, self-realized person. Consequently, as the Shastra confirms, one should accept whatever progressive path the Mahajans advocate. So what a glorious verse, and we are so fortunate because we have Lord Chaitanya, of course, but, in the very, very recent past, we have Srila Prabhupada. And there is no better example of a progressive Mahajan than Srila Prabhupada. And of course, we know Senapati Bhakta, he's one of Lord Chaitanya's foremost generals in the Sankirtan movement. So there's no greater example of a progressive Mahajan than Srila Prabhupada. And there's no higher principle in Krishna consciousness than following the instructions of such Mahajans. In relation to Lord Chaitanya, one of his instructions that supersedes all others is that we should all chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra as much as possible. The word constantly, of course, is used, which means we never stop. But we should chant the Hare Krishna mantra as much as possible, and we should chant it as purely as we possibly can. And if we study the life of Lord Chaitanya, we see, how much he was an extraordinary, and Srila Prabhupada followed in his footsteps, that Lord Chaitanya was an extraordinary reformer. Obviously a spiritual reformer. He was a pure incarnation of Krishna. He was non-different than Krishna, combined incarnation of Krishna and Radharani. So a spiritual reformer, but also a social reformer. But his sole focus was to have everyone getting the incomparable mercy of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, Kali Kali Namarupa Krishna Avatar, spreading this holy name and wanting everybody to understand that there is no difference between the holy name of Krishna and Krishna himself, and that anybody who takes to the chanting of the holy name will be delivered. So this was his mission. And just, sometimes we're in countries, and I guess we've all experienced this, where sometimes it can be challenging, and you might get grief for going out in the street, whether it's from the general public or from the authorities for chanting the holy name. But that also happened to Lord Chaitanya, because the smarter brahmanas, this principle that Lord Chaitanya was bringing, that just chant the holy name, forget about everything else. This again goes back to the point about the progressive Mahajans. So Lord Chaitanya was so progressive, and his message was, forget about everything else, just chant Hare Krishna. But of course, the smarter Brahmins at the time, they couldn't accept this. They couldn't accept it at all. They criticized him, they ridiculed him, they called him a sentimentalist and all these different things. But ultimately, they went and complained about him to the authorities, the authorities of Navadvip. And of course, the authority at that time was a certain Chand Kazi. So they went to Chand Kazi, they complained, and Chand Kazi, basically told them to stop with Harinam. But the devotees didn't. They continued as per Lord Chaitanya's wishes. And then the Kazi, he actually sent his men, his constables, his officers. He sent them, and they broke up one of the Harinams, even broke him a donga or two or whatever, So this was real. This wasn't just, this is Lord Chaitanya living in the real world, if you like, and facing these different obstacles. But what did Lord Chaitanya do? He then got a procession, I think, of 100,000 devotees. 100,000, wow, just having the power to pull that many people together. But 100,000 devotees with thousands of cartels, thousands of madongas, etc., going on a massive procession, a massive Harinam procession, and ending up outside the Chand Kazi's house. And how could he refuse but not to come out and to engage when you have 100,000 people outside your residence like that? So he came out, and then Lord Chaitanya and the Chand Kazi, they got into a discussion. Chand Kazi was a very learned person. He was a learned scholar. He obviously came from a Islam background. He was a Muslim, and he was presenting, the Quran, and of course Lord Chaitanya was presenting Shastra like that. But in due course, Lord Chaitanya, as he had done before in his pastimes with Keshava Kashmiri, he convinced the Chand Kazi, that Harinam Sankirtan is of essential importance in this age of Kali, for the upliftment and the deliverance of the living entities, of people in general. And what did the Chand Kazi do? He basically became a follower of Lord Chaitanya, and he left it even in his will that Harinam Sankirtan, is something that nobody should oppose and nobody should get in the way of. Then you have the relationship between Lord Chaitanya and Haridas Thakur, who also came from a Muslim background, and he was so humble that he didn't want to do anything that might upset anybody because of his background, even though he was chanting 300,000 names of the holy name 300,000 times a day. Just absolutely incredible. And it was so incredible that Lord Chaitanya gave him the name, Namacharya, or the authority of the holy name. And of course, Lord Chaitanya, Haridas Thakur, he wouldn't go to the Jagannath Puri temple. So Lord Chaitanya would go and visit him and arrange for prasadam to be brought to him. This is like the combined incarnation of Radha and Krishna. So impressed by Haridas's humility and Haridas's devotional qualities that he would make all these arrangements for him, even though, you know, he didn't have to. And the fact that he'd come from a Muslim background, nobody would have thought twice about it. But all of these things, Lord Chaitanya, you know, he didn't care about public opinion in that sense. Of course, I'm sure he would have cared about public opinion if it had a negative impact on expanding the movement. But in terms of doing the right thing, that's what was important. And it wasn't important about, you know, social convention and, you know, the chitter chatter of what other people may or may not think, etc. And then, of course, the most famous one of all is his pastime with Jagai and Madai. And this again comes back to the point about Lord Chaitanya being the savior of the most fallen, Patita Pavana. So with Jagai and Madai, they actually came from a Brahminical background, but due to poor association, as we know, they became kind of drunkards and meat eaters, woman hunters, dacoits. You know, basically they were in the Premier League of rascals, you know, of fallen souls, etc. They really were, and they were terrorizing everybody. It's amazing that as well, that, you know, once you get absorbed in sense gratification, it's never enough, because your senses can never be satiated. They can never be satisfied. So you always have to go to higher, or should we say lower, whatever, but you also have to go to go further with your desire, you know, for sense gratification. And that invariably then leads on inflicting suffering and grief and anxiety and pain on other people. And that's exactly what Jagai and Madai were doing. They were terrorizing the local community. And then one day they even attacked Lord Nityananda. You know, Lord Nityananda they attacked. Of course, Lord Nityananda was so merciful, you know, that he didn't want any punishment or consequence for them. All he wanted them to do was chant Hare Krishna. That's why he approached them in the first place. Lord Chaitanya took a different view, of course, summoned his Sudarshan Chakra, but then Lord Nityananda pleaded with him not to use that, told him that's not part of this particular Leela. He was reverting back to his Leela 5,000 years ago as Lord Krishna. Now you're Lord Chaitanya, you're here to deliver the holy name, etc., not to use your Sudarshan Chakra. And Lord Chaitanya then relented and accepted the logic and the pleading of Lord Nityananda. And the condition was on Jagai and Madai, though, for them to be spared, was that from this point on, that's it. It's over. Just like us, when we accept initiation, it's over. Now we're committing not to engage in sinful activity again. So in the same way, that was Lord Chaitanya's condition, and Jagai and Madai complied with that condition, and they gave up their nonsense. Actually, there's one part where it talks about, you know, all the different things that they were engaged in, and that they should give up their will-o'-the-wisp, taking shelter in the illusion, the will-o'-the-wisp of material enjoyment. And I was reading the other day, and let me get it here, Sukadeva Goswami talks about that concept of will-o'-the-wisp. Of course, these words are coming from Lord Chaitanya, from Srila Prabhupada. He's doing the translations, but that's the phrase that he uses in the translation in the 5th canto. I think it's the 5th canto, I think chapter 14, text 7. Just trying to find it here because I have it here somewhere. Bear with me, my apologies. Oh yes, here it is. It's it's Srimad Bhagavatam, canto 5, chapter 14, text 7. And Sukadeva Goswami says, sometimes the living entity is interested in the yellow stool, and yellow stool is gold, the yellow stool known as gold, and runs after it. That gold is the source of material opulence and envy, and it can enable one to afford illicit sex, gambling, meat eating, and intoxication. Those whose minds are overcome by the mode of passion are attracted by the color of gold. Just as a man suffering from cold in the forest runs after a phosphorescent light in a marshy land, considering it to be fire. And this is really interesting and really kind of comes to the point that we've been talking about in relation to leadership. And I just want to finish with a kind of a story, I guess, that connects this phenomena of will-o'-the-wisp and the critical importance of following a leader, but a leader who can guide us safely through the blazing forest fire that is this material world. Yeah. So important. So important. So the story, just connecting those two things. So the will-o'-the-wisp, or the illusion of material enjoyment, that's represented by gold and soft pillows. So gold and sex life, and gold and sense gratification, intoxication, etc., meat eating, gambling. So they're illusions. They don't really exist, and they certainly don't bring us any happiness, any real happiness, any meaningful happiness. But then connecting that with leadership. So this term will-o'-the-wisp, that Prabhupada uses in quite a few places actually in his purports. I'm not sure how many hits it gets on the Vedabase, but Prabhupada uses it in quite a few places. It uses that phrase, will-o'-the-wisp. So that phrase, it's an English phrase, and this is where it comes from. And I just think it fits so perfectly. So where it comes from is some number of hundreds of years ago, not sure exactly, I should have checked before I spoke actually, but we're talking maybe 200 years ago, maybe 300 years ago, that kind of time frame, can check for certain. In England, particularly the east of England, the kind of heading up north a little bit, the northeast of England, and particularly two counties or two shires, the two of them are called Norfolk, and what's the other one? Lincolnshire and Norfolk. They're bordering counties. So those two counties, they're on the eastern side of England, quite close actually. It's just across the North Sea then to Holland, to the Netherlands. And as you know, in the Netherlands, it's a very low-lying country, and they have, thousands and thousands of canals and dikes to help keep the water from rising up and flooding the land, to sort of manage it like that. They manage it through all these canals and dikes like that. So this part of England is similar. It's quite low-lying. It's kind of just at the sea level. Lots of it, or parts of those counties, are like that. And it can be quite dangerous to navigate through that land. Basically, it's marshy, boggy land, as Sukadeva Goswami says here in this translation. Just as a man suffering from cold in the forest runs after a phosphorescent light in a marshy land, considering it to be fire. So these lands are boggy, marshy, like that. And prior to, having proper roads, and prior to having electricity and all of that kind of thing, the government of 200 or 300 years ago, whenever it was, they employed people to help guide people through that marshy land. And the people who did that job, carrying lanterns, they were carrying, I guess, the lanterns, whatever they, whatever they used to burn them, I'm not sure, but some kind of, energy, they were candle type things they would have used. So those people, they were expert. They knew exactly where the safe pathways were through the marshy land, through the boggy land. They knew exactly where those safe pathways were. And what they would do is, they would just constantly, they wouldn't wait for people. There would just be a team of them, and they would be 500 meters between each one of them, and the next one would set off, and they would just walk on the safe pathways, holding their lights up. So when people would come, if they were coming home from work or whatever, and they had to go across this land to get to their homes or whatever business they were on, or whatever their reasons were, they would need to get across. So they would come to the start of the marshy land. They would look out ahead of them, and they would see one of these lanterns, or two of these lanterns, whatever it might be, and then they would know, there's the safe way to go. By the way, these people were called, they had a name, a title, and they were known as Jack of the Lantern. Jack of the Lantern. like that. So the lantern, they had this name Jack, whatever. So Jack of the Lantern. So the people would come to the beginning of the marshy land, look out, see the lamps, and they would say, oh, there's Jack of the Lanterns. Let's follow them. We know we're going to be safe. But marshy lands have another issue. They regularly produce methane gas, whatever the combination of chemicals in the marshy land, they regularly produce methane gas. So sometimes this methane gas would rise from the land and it would ignite. So someone might come to the beginning of this, of the marshy land, they would look out ahead of them. And if they were unfortunate enough that they were just looking out at the time that some of this methane gas was rising and igniting, they would think, oh, there's Jack of the Lantern, and they would walk. But it wouldn't be a Jack of the Lantern. It would be, if you like, an imposter of Jack of the Lantern. And they would walk following that light, and they would immediately fall and descend into the bog and lose their life. And actually that happened to many, many people. They would lose their life that way by following the wrong light. So from our perspective, and that's where the word will-o'-the-wisp comes from. Those gases rising and igniting, they became known as will-o'-the-wisp, that they appear for a short period of time and then they disappear. But if you're unlucky enough to come at the time that they're burning and follow them, you will fall into the marshy land, into the bog, and effectively drowned, if you like, sinking down into that wet mud like that, and you would essentially be consumed, if you like, eaten by the marsh or eaten by the land like that. So from a Krishna conscious perspective, we must find a real, genuine Jack of the Lantern and not a will-o'-the-wisp imposter. Because if we follow an imposter, they will lead us the wrong way, and our lives will be ruined like that. So from our perspective, we're so fortunate because we have, Jack of the Lantern isn't the right way to say it, but we have this incredible beaming light that's burning so brightly in the form of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada. And all we have to do is make sure that we follow his instructions, absorb ourselves in reading his books, and of course chanting Krishna's holy name, because that's the main instruction in Srila Prabhupada's books. But absorbing ourselves in reading Srila Prabhupada's books, understanding more about his life and his sacrifice and everything that he did for us. And he is, and anybody who follows him as a true Jack of the Lantern rather than a will-o'-the-wisp. Anybody who follows Srila Prabhupada's instructions, they are all worthy of being leaders. And it's through Srila Prabhupada's leadership, with all of us following in his footsteps, that we can lead the world out of the abyss and the lack of leadership that we currently face. Thank you all very much. I'm not sure what time it is, but I think I've gone a little over my time for questions, but thank you all very much for tolerating me. It was very nice to be able to speak with you all today. And Parijata, I will hand over to you. I'm not sure if there are any questions or comments that people want to offer.
Yes, I actually thank you so much for that. Wonderful. That was such a graphic, real example. Which you shared in the end. We have one guest question, so we'll take that. We'll just have Shakshi Gopal Prabhu. So our question is from Lalita Gopi, and the question it seems like it can be damaging to the movement if people go out on Harinam and disrupt other people's programs. For instance, showing up on college campuses or disturbing shop owners. Is there a balance in presentation?
Lalita Gopi. Thank you, Lalita Gopi. Very good question, and a very important question. I mentioned when I was speaking that Lord Chaitanya was a social reformer, and he didn't stand on convention, and he was willing to lead and all of those kind of things. But at the same time, this is where we really have to pray to Krishna for good intelligence, because this is where good intelligence comes into it. We have to assess when it's right to push back against what's unreasonable, while at the same time accepting situations that if we push back against them won't actually help in pushing on our movement like that. So that question you raised specifically about, you know, if we're out and people find something a disturbance, it's very true. I know, for instance, that if we go out on Harinam, say on a Saturday afternoon, busy shopping day like that, and you're standing outside a shop front, the shop owner's not going to like that. It's like, you know, hey, here's the thing. It was mentioned, Parijata mentioned at the beginning about restaurants, you know. I don't let devotees have Harinam outside our restaurants, you know. We want people to come into our restaurants. You don't want a whole bunch of people standing outside your door making it more difficult for them to come in. It makes no sense. It's crazy. So shop owners will think like that. They think, well, I don't want these bunch of Hare Krishnas outside making all this noise. It's going to make it more difficult for my customers to come in. So at least in Western cities, it's always so easy to find a shop front that isn't open or is closed down or whatever it may be. So let's go to those shop fronts where we won't be disturbing and people can still hear the holy name like that. And the irony of ironies here is, and I'm sure many, many devotees can attest to this, I can attest to it in relation to London and also Dublin, that oftentimes, and it's really interesting, we've done preaching programs in schools here in Ireland for many, 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 many years. Now some of those who were school kids at the time, you know, teenagers at the time, now they're running their own businesses. It was just about 6 months ago or something like that, was it, when we had one of those, there was a break in the lockdowns and we could go out on Harinams or whatever it was, and we were going on Harinams, and somebody shouted to me, they were running a shop, I don't think they owned it, I think they were the manager, but they shouted from a shop, you know, and caught my attention, and then they told me that we came to their school about 10 years ago or whatever it was, and they really appreciated our presentation and kirtan and all of that. And they invited us into the shop to have a Harinam, a 5-minute or 10-minute Harinam inside the shop. So I think it's just about time, place, and circumstance. Yes, if people really don't want that and don't want you outside of the shop, then respect that. Go to somewhere else where either the shop is closed or where a shop might actually like us to be there. And I know in London, it's quite a regular thing, actually. It's quite a regular thing that shop owners, that they kind of don't mind. They don't mind you either being outside, and some of them actually invite you in. So yeah, if there's resistance, it's not our property. We don't own the shop. We don't own the public pathway. So if there's resistance and people don't want us there, we'll find somewhere else. And let's find places that do want us. And there are many places that do. So yeah, it's time, place, and circumstance.
Thank you for that, Prabhu. I hope that answers Lalita Gopi's question. And actually, in the introduction, in fact, forgot to mention, my apologies, that you are also the chair of the team building group for the GBC. And this just came to my mind when you were actually talking about this principle of unity in diversity, what you said, you read about Srila Prabhupada. And I think that is just such an important element in today's Kali Yuga to, keep people together and work in that spirit, especially in today's times with wars, crises, conflicts. So can you just share with us, one key principle that we can, in a very practical way, keep in our mind in relation to team building, which could extend not just, of course, in the managerial aspect of leadership, but, we all are leading. We are leading our lives. We are leading our families, our children. So in our own way, as devotees, we are leading. And it's so important to have this element of team building, because, that also somewhere extends to the aspect of unity in diversity. So I was just wondering if you can share with us, that one or even 2, 3, if you feel, key principles of team building.
Firstly, Parijata, I think the point you made is an extremely important point. I mean, Srila Prabhupada did say that he came to create a society of Brahmins, and of course, Brahmanas are the head of society. So, Srila Prabhupada wants us all to be leaders. Every single one of us, every man, every woman, every child in this movement, he wants us to be leaders and lead in our own way. And there are so many opportunities to lead in so many different ways. You know, Krishna's unlimited. It's like there's nothing. We should never think that, oh, all the opportunities are filled up with people already. There's nothing for me. No, Krishna's ever expanding, ever increasing. You know, it doesn't matter how many things other people are doing. There is always room to do more, and always room for us to step into the breach and do more. So I really like that point you make, that we're all leaders, absolutely. And Srila Prabhupada wants us all to be leaders. In terms of the point about being able to work as teams, and it is interesting, you know, we understand that whatever instructions someone gives, that the last instructions or the later instructions that people give kind of are the most important, because they're the most recent ones that they gave. And we kind of do understand that that's pretty much Srila Prabhupada's last significant instruction about us cooperating together. So it's a very, very important one. And in relation to it, and cooperation, of course, is the essence of team building, and for a team to work together. Without cooperation, it's just not possible. So in that context, and you asking for one example of something that will help with that, from my own personal realization and my own personal experience, and of course being guilty of it so much myself, the one thing that ruins teams and ruins cooperation is our inability to control our false ego. We have to. False ego, we know: earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, false ego. So you've got the 5 gross elements, you've got the 3 subtle elements. And, you know, we know that the universe coverings are 10 times, you know, whatever they start at 4 billion, is it? And then 40 billion, 400 billion, 4 trillion, whatever it is, you know, these coverings. So the false ego covering is the widest of all. You know, we're into the trillions and trillions or whatever it is of covering like that. So we know that the false ego is the most challenging one. Absolutely, it's the most challenging. And that's why we have to always be so aware of it. I mean, it starts with awareness, you know, be aware of this false ego and whatever. And we know the emotions. I know you're sitting somewhere sometimes and someone is being glorified, and you're thinking to yourself, you know, we gotta get rid of those things, you know, just as there's unlimited space for all of us in terms of having a significant role in Srila Prabhupada's movement and leading Srila Prabhupada's movement, just as we know there are unlimited spaces for that, there are unlimited spaces for everybody to be glorified and whatever. We should never allow ourselves to succumb to jealousy and envy. Envy is really, of all the anarthas, is there any anartha that's more corrosive, more destructive than envy like that? So yeah, false ego and being aware of it, and because once we're aware of it, we have a better chance of dealing with it. If we're ignorant of it, we'll never be able to deal with it. So I would say to always be conscious of our false ego, always be working to reduce and minimize, if not completely eradicate, false ego from our lives. For me, that is arguably the most important thing in terms of being able to have a really good cohesive team, and a good cohesive team that has longevity. All teams maybe can have good cohesion and whatever, but as soon as you allow false ego to enter into the equation, that team's days are pretty much numbered. So yeah, cooperation, cohesion, and longevity. Let's be aware of false ego and let it not get the better of us.
Thank you so much. I think that was such a gem of an instruction and insight. And I think that's like something, as you said, that just keep that in mind always. And I think even in relation to my services, I think that's going to be my key this Gaur Purnima, just to focus and meditate on that aspect of, you know, just to kind of what you said, the inability to control the false ego and work in that space. So that was very, very, I'm so grateful for that personally too. And even besides that, I just also want to, you know, recap some things which are take-home points for me, and I'm sure also for our viewers. What you said this in the beginning, this very, very important key point of welfare of others. That is what leadership is about. We always need to remember it's not about the power and the position, but the focus on welfare, which eventually extends in compassion and responsibility. And then you give this wonderful example of Yudhishthir Maharaj, and not to be callous about the karma, other people's karma. And I think that's so relevant in today's times with all what's happening in Ukraine and all around us, the conflicts, the diseases which are emerging, and we have to be so conscious that we take the responsibility of being compassion. So and also, of course, apply the principle of cooperation, that we can come together as an institution, as Srila Prabhupada wanted us to be. And the best thing, I think I liked what you said today, is that the highest example of progressive Mahajan, Srila Prabhupada. So the big light, that is there for all of us to guide us. And we just hope that this big light of Srila Prabhupada actually takes us in service to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and we can actually take that preaching message as what is the name of our series, Every Town and Village. So thank you so much, Prabhuji. We hope we can host you again as part of our GBC SPT series. And there was a wonderful evening of just so much, deep association and a lot of gems and insights from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Parijata. And just one final comment on what you've just said there about karma and the callousness of it, etc. Because, I think I'll speak for myself. I've certainly been guilty of that in the past, the tendency to think, well, it's just their karma, But actually, if you take that to its logical conclusion, Srila Prabhupada would never have come to the West. He would have just sat there in Vrindavan and said, well, I'm not going to bother because it's just their karma anyway. So yeah, thank you for focusing on that. Much appreciated.
Very nice. Thank you so much. And I would like to just tell my members that this class and this talk is going to be up on the GBC SPT platform, on the Facebook and the YouTube channel. You can hear this again, which I think is what I'm going to do, to go back to just, relish it all over again. And you can share it with your friends and the devotee community. And we still have more talks coming up till Gaur Purnima. So please stay tuned. And thank you very much.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Parijati. Thank you, everybody, for listening. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna. Hare Bol.